In the Imperium of Man, justice is not a principle. It is a weapon, sharpened by fear and wielded without hesitation. I learned that long before I ever became what people now call a bounty hunter. Back when I still believed service meant protection, and loyalty meant survival. The Imperium teaches its citizens through suffering, and it never pauses to see who understands the lesson. Billions die every day to preserve an idea most of them will never truly touch. My name is Kael Vorn, and I live in the cracks of that idea. I am not a soldier anymore, not a citizen, not a criminal in the way the Arbits define the word. I exist in the spaces where law grows thin and authority prefers silence. When the administratum's paperwork moves too slowly, when the Astra Militarum would draw too much attention, and when the Inquisition wants distance from the blood it spills, they turn to people like me. We are cheaper than armies, quieter than orbital fire, and easy to erase once the work is done. Gathis Prime was dying the way most hive worlds do, not in a single catastrophe, but in a long, grinding decay that never truly ends. From orbit, the planet looked like a wounded animal wrapped in iron. Hive spires stabbed upward through choking clouds of pollution, their lights flickering weakly beneath layers of industrial smog. Manufactorum chimneys pumped ash into the sky without pause, turning day into a permanent twilight. No one remembered what the world had been before industry devoured it. Whatever history once existed had been recycled into raw materials centuries ago. My ship, the Pale Warrant, drifted into the void docks without ceremony. Dock servitors guided it in with mechanical precision, their flesh long since replaced by metal and obedience. None of them looked at me when I disembarked. They never do. Hunters survive by remaining forgettable. The docking bay stank of promethium fumes, rust, and recycled air that had passed through too many lungs. High above, a massive Aquila dominated the chamber, cracked and blackened by soot, its wings spread in silent accusation. A reminder of who owned this world, even as it slowly suffocated under the weight of imperial tithes. I stopped beneath it for a moment, not to pray. I stopped to remember a simple truth. The Emperor does not protect, he endures. Most people die never understanding the difference. The contract reached me before I even left the dock levels. My data slate chimed once, a secure channel, triple encrypted, stamped with an administratum seal so old it bordered on relic status. Old seals meant one thing: either the job paid exceptionally well, or it carried the kind of danger the Imperium preferred to bury quietly. I stepped into a narrow alcove between cargo stacks, shielding the slate from drifting cherub skulls and surveillance lenses. The file unlocked after biometric confirmation, and a single name filled the screen in crimson Gothic script. Severin Khol, former Astra Militarum captain, declared traitor. Sedition, mass desertion, unauthorized armed resistance, suspected warp corruption, alive preferred, termination authorized. The reward was vast enough to change a life, or end it very quickly. Khol had once commanded guardsmen. That alone made him dangerous. Officers understood logistics, morale, and how the Imperium hunted its own. Worse, they knew how to vanish into the populations they once defended. The attached images showed riots, burning shrines, executions carried out beneath defaced imperial icons. In several frames, Khol stood calmly amid the chaos, unhelmeted, watching the fires like a man certain of his destiny. Men followed him. That was the real crime. Back aboard my ship, I prepared without ritual or ceremony. Ritual breeds hesitation, and hesitation kills. I stripped my armor down piece by piece, checking seals and stress fractures. Lightweight carapace reinforced with ceramite inserts, functional, scarred, and repainted so many times its original color no longer mattered. Every dent told a story I did not care to remember. Weapons came next. Plasma pistol, modified for faster venting. Bolt carbine, short-barreled, optimized for close urban combat. Combat blade mono-edged, sanctified steel that had ended more lives than I could count. Grenades, auspex, rebreather. No insignia, no markings, nothing that could tie me to a banner or a cause. Hunters who advertise loyalty rarely survive their third contract. As I sealed my armor, I caught my reflection in a scratched metal panel. Older than I remembered, harder. The kind of face that had learned to count life in heartbeats and reload cycles. Once, long ago, I had been a guardsman. That life ended in a trench filled with screaming and fire. This one began with contracts written in blood. Before leaving the ship, I allowed myself a moment of silence. No prayers, no litanies. Faith is dangerous in this galaxy. Believe too deeply and chaos listens. Believe too weakly, and the Imperium decides you are unnecessary. I exist somewhere between respect and realism, acknowledging the Emperor's power without expecting his protection. The descent into the hive was a slow fall into heat, darkness, and noise. Cargo lifts groaned as they carried me downward, away from the spires where the powerful pretended the Imperium still worked. By the time I reached the Underhive, the air tasted like metal and rot. This was where secrets lived, where information sank when it became too inconvenient to exist elsewhere. People noticed me immediately. Even without visible authority, my posture and equipment marked me as dangerous. Mothers pulled children aside. Gangers shifted nervously. No one spoke until I let them. I found a bar carved into the remains of a collapsed hab block, its flickering sign barely legible through grime and age. Inside, patrons drank corpse, starch liquor, and stared into nothing. I took a seat with my back to the wall. The bartender, more augmetic than flesh, did not ask my name. "You're hunting," he said quietly. "Everyone is," I replied. He leaned closer. "Severin Khol." The name carried weight even here. I slid a data chip across the counter. He pocketed it without looking. "What you're chasing isn't just a man anymore," he said. "He's changing people." That was how it always started. Khol had offered hope to the forgotten. Promised resistance. Promised that the Imperium could be denied. Weapons vanished from guard stockpiles. Patrols stopped returning. Symbols appeared carefully carved, deliberate wrong. 8 pointed stars. Blood rituals disguised as sermons. Chaos never arrives screaming. It arrives whispering solutions. By the time I returned to my ship, there was no doubt left. Severin Khol was no longer just a traitor officer. He was a spark, and sparks are extinguished quickly in the Imperium. As the pale warrant lifted from the hive, the city shrank beneath me, its lights flickering like a failing heart. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the moment before the hunt truly begins. I did not know how this contract would end. Only that, like all the others, it would be paid for in blood. The Underhive of Gathis Prime did not sleep. It only sank deeper into itself. As I descended, the temperature climbed and the light thinned until the world became a haze of rusted metal, flickering lumen strips, and bodies pressed too close together. The air was thick with chemical runoff and recycled breath, filtered through systems so old no one remembered who had built them. Every step downward felt like moving through layers of a corpse that refused to die. This was where information hid. Not because people wanted to protect it, but because no one up above cared enough to look. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting the crowds adjust to my presence. Fear spreads faster than gunfire down here. I kept my hands away from my weapons and my helmet mag locked at my belt. Appear too aggressive and you draw blades. Appear weak and you invite them. The Underhive noticed everything. Eyes followed me from behind scrap walls and flickering holos. Gangers paused mid-argument. A pair of hab workers stopped talking the moment I passed. They could tell I wasn't Arbitz, wasn't guard, wasn't a preacher or a slaver. I was something worse, someone who didn't belong to any of them. People like me meant someone was about to disappear. I followed the rumors first. That meant listening without asking questions. You don't interrogate the Underhive. You let it talk while pretending you aren't listening. Khol's name came up often, always in lowered voices, always followed by a glance over the shoulder. Some spoke of him with fear, others with something dangerously close to reverence. They said he spoke like a soldier but listened like a priest, that he remembered names, that he didn't promise miracles, only choices, that he stood unarmed before angry crowds and somehow walked away untouched, that he took weapons from the Imperium and redistributed them to people who had never held power in their lives. Hope again. Hope was the most lethal weapon chaos had ever discovered. I stopped at a market built into the hollowed out remains of an old transit hub. Stalls lined the walls, selling scrap tech, ration substitutes, illegal augmetics, and charms claimed to ward off daemons. Most of them were worthless. A few were dangerously real. A woman with augmetic eyes watched me from behind a table of power cells. Her gaze lingered too long to be coincidence. "You're not from here," she said flatly. "Neither is anyone who survives," I replied. She snorted. "You looking for the preacher?" I didn't answer. Silence is often more effective than denial. She leaned closer. "You won't like what you find." "I rarely do." She told me Khol had passed through this sector 2 weeks ago, that he'd spoken to workers in the open, under broken lumen towers and shattered imperial statues. That Arbit's patrols had come later and found nothing but empty streets and burned propaganda leaflets. No bodies, no resistance, just absence. That was new. Rebellions usually left corpses behind. Khol didn't. I paid her and moved on. The deeper I went, the more the atmosphere changed. The Underhive wasn't just crowded here, it was tense. Armed groups lingered in alleys that should have belonged to rival gangs. People shared glances instead of insults. There was organization where there should have been chaos. Someone was coordinating them. I felt it then. That faint pressure at the back of my skull, the kind that makes instincts itch and skin crawl. I had felt it before, on worlds that didn't survive long after. Warp proximity, not strong, not yet, but present. I activated my auspex and filtered for energy fluctuations. The readings spiked and dipped erratically, like a heartbeat trying to find a rhythm. Whatever Khol was involved with, it wasn't just ideology anymore. I found the first shrine shortly after. It had once been dedicated to the Emperor. The Aquila had been pried from the wall, leaving jagged scars in the metal. In its place was a crude symbol scratched into the surface, not openly obvious, not fully formed. Just enough lines to suggest something older, something patient. Blood stained the floor, dried and layered. Ritual blood, but restrained, controlled. Someone knew what they were doing. I backed away slowly. The Imperium would call this heresy. The Inquisition would call it infestation. I called it escalation. As night cycles blurred into one another, I followed Khol's trail through informants, bribes, and half-truths. I learned that former guardsmen had joined him, men trained in discipline, men who had seen the Imperium abandon entire regiments without explanation. He gave them purpose again. Structure. Orders that felt righteous. That kind of loyalty was hard to break. One name kept surfacing, an old manufactorum district near the edge of the Hive sprawl. Officially decommissioned, unofficially forgotten. The perfect place to gather forces without attracting attention. I needed confirmation. That meant meeting someone who wouldn't want to talk to me. I found him in a pressure-sealed hab deep beneath a collapsed transit shaft. A former ironclad, the 117th, Khol's old regiment. He had lost both legs below the knee and replaced them with crude augmetics that whined when he moved. He recognized me immediately. "You're here to kill him," he said. "Yes, he won't let you. Everyone bleeds," I replied. The man laughed sharp and bitter. "He already died once. That's the part you don't understand." He told me Khol had been left behind during a withdrawal years ago. Ordered to hold a position no longer mattered. No resupply, no extraction, just silence. Khol survived for weeks in enemy territory, watching his men starve and die while the Imperium erased their existence with revised orders. Something broke in him then. Something listened. The man leaned forward. "He doesn't pray to gods," he whispered. "He listens to voices that answer back." That was enough. When I left, I knew where this was heading. Manufactorums, abandoned war zones, places soaked in death and industry, perfect breeding grounds for warp corruption. Back aboard the Pale Warrant, I reviewed everything. Patterns, timelines, movements. Khol wasn't running. He was preparing, consolidating, testing loyalty, building something that could survive even if he didn't. That made him more dangerous than a cult leader. That made him a seed. I checked my ammunition and increased my armor-sealed tolerances. Whatever waited in those ruins, it wouldn't be just men anymore. Chaos doesn't replace faith overnight. It layers it slowly, until people no longer remember what they believed before. As I plotted my route toward the manufactorum district, the pressure in my skull returned, stronger this time. I ignored it. Hunters who listen to whispers don't live long. The ship's engines hummed as we cut through polluted skies, leaving the hive lights behind. Below, the Underhive swallowed itself again, secrets buried under generations of suffering. Khol was ahead of me now, not running, waiting. And for the first time since taking the contract, I understood why the Imperium wanted him erased quietly. This wasn't just a man who had turned against them. This was the beginning of something that could spread. The manufactorum district lay beyond the hive sprawl like a wound that never closed. From above, it looked abandoned. Collapsed smokestacks, skeletal conveyor towers, loading cranes frozen mid-motion like the bones of some extinct beast. No lights, no traffic, no Vox traffic either, which was far more troubling. In a city that never truly slept, silence meant preparation. I brought the Pale Warrant down on auxiliary thrusters, keeping low and slow, letting the polluted clouds swallow my descent. Auspex readings spiked the moment I crossed into the district. Residual energy, heat signatures that faded the instant I focused on them. Jamming fields layered unevenly, amateurish but effective. Someone had learned fast. I set the ship down inside a collapsed cargo hangar and powered it into standby. No external lights, no beacons. If I had learned anything in this galaxy, it was that survival favored those who arrived quietly and left without witnesses. The moment my boots touched the ground, the pressure returned. It was subtle at first, a tightening behind the eyes. A faint static sensation crawling along the inside of my skull, like distant Vox interference that refused to resolve into sound. Warp-adjacent phenomena often began like that. Not with daemons, not with madness, but with discomfort. With unease that made rational thought just a little harder, I sealed my helmet. The air inside the manufactorum ruins was thick with dust and metallic decay. Ancient machines loomed around me, their surfaces scarred by shrapnel and age, their function long forgotten. Production lines that once fed the Imperium's endless hunger for weapons and armor now stood as monuments to abandonment. The Imperium created, the Imperium consumed, and when a place no longer produced enough to justify its existence, it was left to rot. That rot had drawn something in. I advanced slowly, auspex sweeping in wide arcs. Footprints crisscrossed the ash-covered floor, recent, numerous, disciplined, not a mob, a force. Guardsmen habits were visible even here, spacing overlapping fields of movement, fallback routes marked with subtle signs. Khol hadn't just gathered followers. He had rebuilt a unit. A sudden flicker on my display made me freeze. Movement, high ground. I rolled sideways a split second before the first shot rang out. The bolt round detonated against the floor where my head had been, showering me with fragments of ferrocrete. Autogun fire followed, stitching the air with tracer rounds. The ambush was clean, coordinated, and deadly. I returned fire without hesitation. The bolt carbine roared in short, controlled bursts, each round punching through cover and flesh alike. A cultist, no, a former guardsman, fell screaming from an overhead gantry, his armor cracked open like a dropped shell. I moved immediately, never firing from the same position twice. Manufactorum combat was vertical and lethal. Anyone who stayed still died quickly. Grenades came next. Frag detonations tore through a cluster of attackers advancing from the left flank, turning bodies into broken shapes that barely resembled men. The shockwave rattled ancient machinery, setting off warning klaxons that screamed briefly before dying again. Then the chanting started, low at first, almost rhythmic, words that didn't belong to any sanctioned dialect, layered with meaning that made my teeth ache. The pressure in my skull intensified, and for a moment my vision blurred. I gritted my teeth and pushed forward. Hunters don't retreat from noise. I dropped behind a rusted assembly unit and vented my plasma pistol. A shape moved through the smoke too fast. I fired on instinct. Blue, white energy screamed through the air and struck the target center mass. The body didn't explode like it should have. It staggered, armor glowing red hot, and kept coming. Warp touched. I fired again, this time aiming for the head. The figure collapsed, twitching, its helmet rolling free to reveal a face twisted by devotion and terror in equal measure. Human. Still human. That made it worse. They pressed me hard after that. Former guardsmen moved with discipline, laying down suppressive fire while others flanked through the machinery. Cultists followed behind them, fearless, reckless, screaming praise to powers that answered back. I fought meter by meter, retreating toward a central production chamber where the ceiling opened into a vast cathedral of steel and shadow. That was when I felt him. Severin Khol did not announce himself with a roar or a sermon. His presence settled over the battlefield like gravity. The chanting synchronized. The pressure in my skull sharpened into something almost focused. The fighting slowed. Men stopped advancing and began to withdraw, forming a loose perimeter. Smoke cleared just enough for me to see him standing at the far end of the chamber, illuminated by flickering emergency lumens. He wore corrupted guard armor, its once regimental markings scraped away and replaced with etched symbols that crawled when I looked at them too long. His posture was calm, almost relaxed, as if the battle around him was an inconvenience rather than a threat. "You came alone," he said, his voice carrying without amplification. "I usually do," I replied, keeping my weapon trained on his center mass. "That's why you're still alive." I circled slowly, searching for angles, exits, anything I could use. Khol didn't move. He didn't need to. The air around him felt wrong, dense, resistant, like pushing against water. "You're wasting lives," I said. "This ends here." He smiled, and it wasn't a madman's grin. It was tired, bitter, familiar. "Does it," he asked, "or does it end when the Imperium finally notices us?" I fired. The plasma bolt should have taken his head off. Instead, it dispersed inches from his body, unraveling into sparks of light that faded into nothing. A ripple passed through the air, and the pressure in my skull spiked so hard I nearly blacked out. Khol sighed. "I hoped you'd listen first." The chanting surged, and something tore through the veil. Not a daemon, not fully. A shape formed in the shadows behind him, half idea, half flesh, its presence bending light and sound. My auspex screamed errors and shut down entirely. The thing did not advance. It didn't need to. It was an answer summoned but restrained. I understood then. Khol wasn't a servant. He was a negotiator. I hurled a cracked grenade and dove for cover as it detonated. The explosion tore chunks from the chamber floor, collapsing part of the ceiling and sending debris crashing down. The shockwave staggered everyone, cultists, guardsmen, even Khol. The warp, shape scream, a sound that clawed at my thoughts and recoiled into shadow. I ran. Retreat isn't cowardice, it's accounting. I cut through secondary corridors, pursued by gunfire and half, seen shapes that whispered my name despite never hearing it spoken. My armor alarms blared warnings, structural damage, neural stress, toxin exposure. I ignored them all and kept moving. By the time I reached my ship, my lungs burned and my vision swam. I sealed the hatch and initiated liftoff procedures while rounds pinged uselessly off the hull. Engines roared, lifting me away from the ruins as tracer fire clawed at the smoke-filled sky. Only when the manufactorum vanished beneath the clouds did I allow myself to breathe. Khol had let me leave. That fact settled heavier than any wound. Back in orbit, I stripped off my armor and sat in silence, hands shaking despite myself. I replayed the encounter over and over, analyzing every moment, every mistake. I had walked into a controlled environment, against a target who understood the warp far better than the Imperium's files suggested. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was a countdown. Khol was building towards something, and I had just confirmed it for him. He knew the Imperium was coming. He knew hunters would follow, and he was ready. I cleaned my blade anyway, because whether this ended in blood or fire, my part was not finished, not yet. I did not sleep after leaving the manufactorum. Sleep invites dreams, and dreams are doors. Instead, I sat strapped into the command chair of the pale warrant, armor stripped away, wounds cleaned and sealed with practiced efficiency. My hands moved on instinct while my mind replayed the encounter again and again. Every word Khol had spoken, every moment where he could have killed me but chose not to. That choice mattered. In my experience, chaos worshippers did not let enemies walk away unless there was a reason, fear, manipulation, or confidence so absolute it bordered on inevitability. Khol had not looked afraid. He had not looked triumphant either. He had looked patient. That was worse. I ran diagnostics on my ship and myself. Armor integrity compromised, neural feedback elevated, residual warp exposure confirmed. Nothing lethal, not yet. The medica servitor suggested sedation. I ignored it. Hunters who dull their edges don't last long. Instead, I started pulling data. If Khol was preparing for something larger, it would leave traces. Resource movement, Vox traffic anomalies, population shifts. The Imperium is vast, but it is not subtle. When people move in large numbers, even forgotten systems notice. Patterns emerge slowly. Entire hab blocks in the lower hive had emptied over the past 10 days. Not evacuated, abandoned. Food distribution rerouted. Power fluctuations localized around the manufactorum district, and several connected transit tunnels long thought collapsed. Someone had been reopening old arteries of the hive. Someone with engineers, former guardsmen, former manufactorum overseers, adepts who had learned that loyalty was rewarded with neglect. Khol wasn't just gathering fighters. He was building a sanctuary. The realization sat heavy in my chest. Sanctuaries were how cult movements survived decapitation. Kill the leader and the structure collapses. Build a belief system with places to anchor it, and the belief outlives the man. That meant my window was closing. I needed leverage, something Khol couldn't ignore. The answer came from an unlikely place. An encrypted signal hit my long-range Vox array, bouncing through civilian relay stations in a pattern too sloppy to be professional. Someone wanted to be noticed. I traced it back to a mid-hive district bordering the Underhive, neutral territory claimed by no gang for very good reasons. I went alone. The meeting place was an abandoned transit chapel, its walls still bearing faded imperial iconography beneath layers of graffiti and soot. The Emperor's face had been scratched out repeatedly, as if no one could decide whether to erase him or remember him. The man waiting inside wore Arbit's armor, or what remained of it. The chest plate was cracked, the insignia stripped away, the shock maul hanging at his side unpowered. His helmet rested on the floor between us like an offering. "You're hunting Khol," he said. "Yes. He's going to kill a lot of people." "So am I replied. "That's not unusual." He flinched at that, but didn't argue. Instead, he told me his name and rank, neither of which mattered anymore. He had been part of the Arbit's task force assigned to contain Khol's early uprisings. They had underestimated him, treated him like a standard rebel leader. That mistake had cost them. Khol let us arrest him once, the Arbit said quietly. Walked into custody without resistance, smiled the whole time. I already didn't like where this was going. He never made it to interrogation, the man continued. The holding block failed. Power outage, security feeds corrupted. When we got inside, everyone was dead except him. He was sitting on the floor, hands bound, praying. "To the Emperor?" I asked. The Arbit shook his head. "No, they tried to execute him on the spot after that. The order came down sealed and absolute. But the weapon jammed. Then the backup. Then the backup to the backup. By the time they regained control, Khol was gone and the precinct was burning. He knows when death is coming," the Arbit said. "Or something tells him." I studied the man carefully. He was exhausted, hollowed out by guilt and fear, not corrupted, not yet, just broken. "Why tell me this?" I asked. "Because you're not pretending this is righteous," he replied. "And because if he finishes what he's building, the Hive won't survive the response." That was the truth no one liked to say out loud. The Imperium did not reclaim worlds gently. If Khol succeeded in creating a stable chaos foothold, Gathis Prime would be purged, not liberated, not saved, erased. The Arbits gave me access codes, old transit routes, forgotten maintenance shafts, blind spots in Hive surveillance that still hadn't been corrected. Then he picked up his helmet and walked away without another word. I never saw him again. Using the new data, I planned my approach carefully. Direct assault was suicide. Khol expected hunters, expected soldiers. What he might not expect was infiltration. The sanctuary lay beneath the manufactorum ruins, deeper than I had gone before. Old magma, transfer tunnels, sealed during the Hive's expansion centuries ago. No official maps existed, only memory and half, no ship, no backup, just armor, weapons, and silence. The tunnels were hot, narrow, and alive with the sound of distant machinery that should not have been running. Symbols lined the walls now, less crude than before, more deliberate. This wasn't random worship, it was structured, refined, educated. I passed living quarters carved into the rock, occupied by families, not fighters. Children slept beneath flickering lights powered by jury-rigged generators. They were clean, fed, protected. That shook me more than any daemon ever had. Chaos usually fed on desperation. Khol was offering stability. The deeper I went, the stronger the pressure became. Not painful, intimate, like something leaning close, examining me, testing. I shut out everything but motion and breath. The inner chamber was vast, carved out of the planet's bones and reinforced with ancient adamantium struts. Hundreds were gathered there, workers, former soldiers, medica, tech adepts stripped of mechanica sigils. At the center stood Khol, unarmed, speaking quietly. He wasn't preaching madness, he was talking about supply chains, defense plans, what to do when the Imperium retaliated, how to survive orbital blockade. This wasn't a cult, it was a government. My target noticed me the moment I stepped into the light. The crowd didn't panic, they didn't attack, they parted. Khol faced me with the same calm expression as before. "I finish my contracts," I replied. He nodded. "Then listen before you do." I should have shot him. Instead, I listened. He spoke of the guard he had commanded, of worlds abandoned because they were no longer profitable, of orders rewritten after the dead could no longer object. He did not glorify chaos, he treated it like a force of nature, dangerous, powerful, unavoidable. "The Imperium lies to itself," he said. I refused to. Something stirred behind him, unseen but present. Not a master, a witness. "You're building a future on damnation," I said. "Every future is built on something," he replied. At least mine admits the cost. The crowd watched me, waiting. I realized then that killing him here would turn him into a martyr. Worse, it would trigger everything he had prepared. The Imperium would respond with fire, and these people, families, children, would burn with him. That was the trap. Khol had built a situation where victory looked exactly like defeat. I disengaged my weapon. For the first time since becoming a hunter, I hesitated, and chaos noticed. The pressure surged, sharper now eager, promising clarity, purpose, an end to the endless cycle of contracts and blood. I slammed my mental barriers shut and stepped back. This isn't over, I said. Khol inclined his head. No, he agreed. It's just begun. I withdrew without violence, escorted out by people who should have hated me but didn't. That was the most disturbing part of all. Back on my ship, I sat in silence longer than usual. The Imperium wanted Khol dead, Chaos wanted him alive, and for the first time, I wasn't sure which outcome would kill fewer people. That uncertainty was a liability, and liabilities get hunters killed. I did not transmit my report to the administrator. That alone was enough to mark me as dead, if anyone noticed. Instead, I sat in orbit above Gathis Prime and watched the planet breathe poison into the void. The hive lights flickered like a dying nervous system, millions of lives pulsing beneath layers of metal and lies. Somewhere below, Severin Khol continued building something that should not have been allowed to exist. Somewhere deeper still, the warp listened. The Imperium believes indecision is weakness. Chaos believes doubt is an invitation. Both are wrong. Indecision is a pause, doubt is awareness, and awareness in the right hands can be weaponized. I reviewed every scrap of data I had gathered, not the lies, not the rhetoric, the logistics, power rerouting, food distribution, medical access, defense grids built from salvage guard doctrine. Khol wasn't preparing for ascension, he was preparing for siege. He knew the Imperium would come. He also knew it wouldn't come quietly. The question was no longer whether I should kill him. It was when and how, and what would happen after. I ran the projections myself. If I executed Khol publicly, the sanctuary would erupt, loyalists would riot, cultists would retaliate, arbits would escalate. The Inquisition would eventually arrive and decide the world was compromised beyond acceptable thresholds. Exterminatus probability high. If I killed him quietly, the structure would fracture but not collapse. Leadership would splinter. Chaos elements would fight for dominance. Civil war inside the hive would follow. The Imperium would respond slower, but with just as much brutality. Exterminatus probability moderate. If I did nothing, Khol's movement would stabilize. His negotiations with the warp would deepen. Eventually, he would lose control, or gain too much of it. Exterminatus probability, inevitable. There were no good outcomes, only less catastrophic ones. That was when the Inquisition noticed me. The signal pierced my ship's systems without resistance. No encryption warning, no access challenge, just presence. A voice calm and precise carried through the bridge. Kael Vorn, it said, "You are operating outside your mandate." I didn't reach for my weapon. That would have been pointless. "I'm still operating," I replied. "That's the difference." The hololithic projector activated on its own. A robed figure resolved into view, features hidden beneath shadows and sigils of authority that hurt to look at for too long. Inquisitor, or something close enough that the distinction no longer mattered. "You have failed to deliver your report." The voice continued. "You have made unauthorized contact with a confirmed heretic. Explain." "I'm preventing a purge," I said. "For now." Silence followed. Calculating silence. "Gathis Prime is already lost," the Inquisitor said eventually. "Your target has crossed thresholds that cannot be uncrossed. The question is whether we cauterize or excise." "Cauterization kills fewer," I replied. "That is not our primary concern." I leaned back in the chair. "Then you don't need me. You need a fleet." Another pause. "You will return to the surface," the Inquisitor said. "You will complete your contract. You will transmit confirmation. Then you will await further instruction, and if I don't, then you will be declared compromised," the voice said calmly, and erased. The projection vanished. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was honest. I prepped for descent without further thought. The decision had already been made. Not by the Imperium, not by chaos, by me. The sanctuary was quieter when I returned. Too quiet. That worried me more than resistance. I moved through the tunnels without encountering patrols, past living quarters now empty, power drawn inward toward the central chamber, like blood rushing to a wound. Khol had accelerated his plans. The inner chamber had changed. The symbols were sharper now, more complete. The air vibrated with restrained energy, like a held breath stretched too far. The people were gone, evacuated, protected. He had removed the leverage. Only Khol waited at the center, standing before a structure that had not been there before. A conduit, a focus, not a portal, but a bridge in the making. "You came back," he said, without turning.
"Yes," I replied.
"This time to finish it." He faced me, eyes clearer than before, resolute. "You know what happens if you kill me," he said. "Yes." "You know what happens if you don't." "Yes," he smiled faintly. "Then you understand." "I understand you're wrong," I said. "About one thing." He waited. "You think you're in control." The pressure surged as the warp responded, tendrils of unreality curling around the chamber walls, not violent, expectant. Khol's voice lowered. "I'm containing it, for now," I said. "So did every other man who ever said that." He stepped toward the conduit, placing a hand against its surface. The structure pulsed in response, hungry. "I won't let the Imperium burn these people," he said. "If that means bargaining with monsters, so be it." "You don't bargain with the warp," I replied. "You rent it, and the interest compounds." The conduit flared. Something pushed back. Not a daemon, something older, smarter. Khol stiffened as whispers flooded the chamber, words slipping through the cracks of reality. His control wavered, just for a second. That was enough. I fired. Not at his head, not at his heart, at the conduit. The plasma bolt struck the structure and detonated, unleashing contained energy in a violent backlash. Reality screamed. The chamber buckled. Khol was thrown backward, slamming into the floor as the warp howled in rage and denial. The bridge collapsed. The thing on the other side did not emerge, but it did not leave unmarked. Khol convulsed, screaming as light and shadow tore through him. Not possession, rejection. The warp does not forgive broken promises. I stood over him as the chamber stabilized, weapons-trained systems screaming warnings. "You were right," he gasped. "They won't stop." "No," I said. "But neither will you." His eyes cleared one last time. "Then do it," he whispered. "Don't let them use what's left of me." That was the difference between a fanatic and a man who had gone too far. I killed him cleanly. When it was done, the pressure lifted. The whispers faded. The chamber became just stone and metal again, scarred but real. I transmitted confirmation, not to the administratum, to the Inquisition. Then I left. The Imperium responded 3 days later. Not with exterminators. Not yet. They quarantined sectors, purged leadership, rewrote records. Khol became a footnote, a failed rebellion crushed by loyal forces. The sanctuary was dismantled quietly. Thousands lived who would have died screaming. Thousands more disappeared anyway. That is how mercy works in the Imperium. As for me, my bounty was paid into an account that no longer existed. My ship's transponder began flagging red in every system. Old contacts stopped responding. I became what I had always known I would. Unaligned, unwelcome, necessary. I left Gathis Prime behind and disappeared into the void. Another hunter moving through a galaxy that feeds on men like me and never remembers their names. I do not regret killing Severin Khol. I regret that he was right about one thing. The Imperium does not protect. It endures, and so do I, for now.